All right, I'll give everyone a couple seconds to trickle in here and then we can kind of get started. All right, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Quentin Moorhead, and I'm the National Account Manager of Top Crop Manager in Potatoes in Canada. I'm joined today by Bob Tosh, Farm and Family Business Advisor with MNP. Bob Tosh is a Farm and Family Business Advisor with MNP who has helped more than 200 families transition to the next generation. Today, he will be discussing the typical farm family, the three-circle model, and key issues of transition these farm families face. He will also talk about the importance of communication and how there is no right or wrong answer when having these conversations. Thanks to MNP for sponsoring our session today. MNP is a leading national accounting, tax, and business consulting firm for Canada's agriculture industry. They have invested more time and resources into understanding agriculture than any other firm, with more than 18,000 agriculture clients and a team of more than 600 agriculture specialists. MNP delivers a diverse suite of services to protect farmers and maximize results. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available to all attendees and registrants approximately 24 hours after our live broadcast. The session is scheduled to run for approximately 45 minutes to an hour. Bob will speak for about 45 minutes, and following the presentation, we'll open the floor to questions. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please type them into the questions tab. This webinar has also been approved for one CCA CEU in professional development. Further instruction for submission will follow the presentations. Without further ado, I'll turn things over to Bob.
Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks for attending. My role today really is to guide you through some of the challenges that most farm families face when dealing with the issue of intergenerational transition. So let's just get the first word up there is discernment. And I try and encourage everyone to understand what this word means. And it starts with the ability to judge well. It is a process that leads to a decision to do or not do something, but it combines both thinking and feeling. And it's a method of guiding heartfelt and useful decisions by asking yourself the deepest questions with liberty and inspiration. And the reason I say all this is because often there's this push for the right answer. And the problem with this kind of challenge is that there isn't a right or wrong answer. There is a path that you pick as you navigate through the paradoxes that you face, where if you pull in one direction, you give up something in the other direction. And it's probably one of the biggest challenges for farm families is this, is effectively you've got to make a decision, and the decision is to some extent a compromise. And so you've got to always think about what is it you are trying to achieve. And so my purpose today is to take you through some scenarios that will probably resonate with most of you and allow you your own opportunities to do some of your own work. And I think that's important, because I think if you defer all of your decision making to someone else, to a professional, whoever that happens to be, you will lose sight of what it is you are trying to achieve, and you might again lose some sight in what some of the family relationships in doing this. So I'd like to introduce you to the Glen family. And the Glen family is a very typical farm family that we see consistently throughout Canada. And it's a fictitious family, it doesn't exist. But when I start describing it to you, almost certainly you will recognize the characters. So we have Dad, who's Jim, and Jim is 60. So Jim's at that age now where he's having actually the time of his life. He's got some of his kids back at the farm. The farm is prosperous. They've come through some tough times. He is very comfortable with his understanding of what he's trying to do. He's very confident with his ability to run and manage the farm. Jim was born on the farm. He was born to farm. Farming is his life. Farming is his identity. And at the age of 60, he's in what he would consider his sweet spot, and he's loving what he's doing. Kathy is his wife. Kathy is a couple of years younger. Kathy has a few different concerns. Kathy came from a farm that failed, and her experience and her memories of farming are different. Her memories of farming are ones where the economic situation wasn't great. She got out early. Her and Jim married early. She has been on the farm with Jim her whole life and helped and worked on the farm with Jim. But her memory and her experiences are one of cash shortages and tough times, and much more of a sort of challenging environment, where Kathy is now a little bit more inclined to think about what she wants to do with the rest of her life. And she's probably thinking along the lines of, I want to spend more time with my grandkids. I want to spend more time traveling. I might want to move off the farm. There's all sorts of things in Kathy's head that says, I need to move on from this, and I want to do something slightly different. So you can see that her and Jim are not necessarily on the same page. Their oldest daughter, their oldest child is a girl, and that has an impact on her opportunities. Definitely in this case had an impact on her opportunities. So Jenna was born on the farm, actually loves the farm. She's very close. She still stays, comes and visits, and when she was growing up, she was very active on the farm. She was a member of 4-H. But Jenna was, as I said, she was female. She didn't feel that she was offered the same opportunities, and so she trained as a nurse. And Jenna married Tom, and Tom's a journeyman mechanic. He likes the farm. He comes back and helps whenever, but really says, well, it's none of my business. I don't want really to get involved, but I would like to see, us continue to have access. And they have 3 children, Tiffany, Jess, and Dylan. And obviously Jenna is very keen to see her kids continue to have access to something of the lifestyle that she had as a child growing up. Like I said, still very emotionally connected to the farm. And then we have the second child, but the oldest male child, and that's Colton. And Colton is a guy who's driven to farm. He has always been interested from a very early age. He went to university, he got a degree in ag. He came back to the farm, and he's been on the farm ever since. And he married Beth, who's a local girl. She's not from a farm, but she's from a local small town community. So she understands some of the politics. She's exposed to some of the opinions and some of the pressures. And they have 2 children, Jake and Ethan, who are both very interested in farming. And then Jim and Kathy's 3rd child and 2nd son is Trevor. And Trevor is a little bit of a black sheep. He was somewhat lost in his growing up, wasn't sure whether he wanted to be active on the farm or not, was a little bit of a wild child. He left the farm to go and work in the oil patch, earned quite a lot of money. And you can see that in this family tree situation, he had a partner who they've since divorced, but they had a child, interestingly called Colton, with a different spelling. And so Trevor was kind of still a little lost, but came back to the farm when he felt that the economics of the oil patch weren't working out for him. And he then took what's called a common law partner, and they have a child. And Lacey is somewhat unconnected to agriculture. And then we see that we have the youngest child, and the youngest child is Josh. And if you can do the math, you can see that Josh is significantly younger and might perhaps have been an afterthought. And Josh he's grown up as this kid who's been reasonably spoiled. You know, he's the baby of the family. He's got much older siblings who've tended to sort of look after him. He grew up on the farm when the farm was really prosperous. He sort of never wanted for anything. He got time to go and play sports. He spent, you know, he spent a reasonable amount of time sort of off the farm doing other things. So what you see here is a scenario that we see all of the time. And I want you to keep this family in mind. And in all honesty, this isn't rocket science. You can all do this with your own families. You know, squares for males and circles for females, and just create your family tree. And I want to now introduce you to a very significant model that we use in this intergenerational family-owned business work. And the first circle is the family circle. And the second circle is ownership. So who owns the assets? And the third circle is business. So that's who works or manages the business. And in farms, we tend to have those three circles on top of each other. And we don't tend to separate out the family decisions from ownership decisions from business decisions. We tend to blend our decision making into all three. And you notice this is a Venn diagram, so there are areas of overlap. And it's the areas of overlap that are where we see the most tension, and they're the areas of most concern when we deal with intergenerational transition. Now, it's not a flat model. We do have stages that are important. So the family might be at the young family stage, it might be at the entering the business stage, it might be at the working together stage, or it might be at the passing the baton stage. And those stages of family development are important for someone like me when working with families to understand, where's this family at? What phase of development are they at? And then we have the ownership phases. So we have controlling ownership, sibling partnership, and cousin consortium. And I just want to be very clear that that isn't necessarily a linear transition. In other words, not every controlling ownership business transitions to a sibling partnership. Some controlling ownership businesses go to controlling ownerships. Some sibling partnerships might go back up to controlling ownership. Some cousin consortiums might do the same thing. So it's just the stage of development that they're at. But the very important piece of this puzzle is the level of success we expect to see. And in sibling partnerships, we might honestly only see a 30% chance of a successful transition to the next generation. And cousin consortiums might actually only have a 5% chance. And that's a very important piece of the puzzle, especially in farming. So what we see in farming is a lot of controlling ownership, quite a lot of sibling partnerships, but we don't see very many cousin consortiums. And there's a reason for that. And that reason is the lack of formal structures and processes that can allow a cousin consortium to operate. And then we have startup businesses, we have expansion, formalization, and we have maturity. And most farms are at the expansion and formalization phase. Some are at the startup, and if they're at startup, they're probably not doing an intergenerational transition. And if they're at maturity, they might be, but sometimes they've limited themselves by not being in an expansion phase. So this model is extremely important. And then I want you to remember the Glen family. And again, I've said this, you can all do a family tree, and you can all draw 3 circles on a piece of paper. So what I want you to think about next is, where does everyone fit now? So Jim, if you remember his dad, as dad, he's obviously a member of the family. Jim owns the farm. In fact, the farm is an incorporated asset, and the farm is, it's an incorporated entity, and all of the assets are in the company, including the land. In this case, that's not always the case, but in this case. And Jim is a shareholder of the business. And then we see Kathy, and Kathy fits again in all 3 circles. So member of the family, is an owner of the business. She is a shareholder of the company. She doesn't really know why. She doesn't really understand what being a share owner means. She has 50 Class B common shares, but she doesn't have a clue what that actually means. She just signed the piece of paper. But Kathy works on the farm, and yeah, so she fits in all 3 as well. And then we have Jenna, who's the oldest daughter, and Jenna has no ownership and doesn't work in the business. She's a nurse, so she only fits in the family circle. And then we have Colton, who's the oldest male child, who's worked on the farm his whole life, but there's been no transition of ownership at this stage. So he fits in the family circle, and he works in the business. And then we have Trevor. Trevor came back late, but he's working on the farm now, because a lot of farms have an open door policy that allows anyone who wants to come back. And so Trevor's come back, and again, he has no ownership, so he fits in the family circle, and he fits in the business circle. Josh fits on the edge because he helps out on weekends. He's at university now. He's not really clear of his role, but he's still there doing some work. So he's kind of on the line between the family and the business. So he fits maybe in just in the family, or maybe in the family and the business piece. Tom's the son-in-law. He definitely only sits in the family, and the 3 children all sit in the family circle. We have Beth. Now, Beth is, Colton's wife. She doesn't help on the farm. She has her own job. She's looking after her kids. She's looking over the fence, saying, well, okay, my husband, my life has been around developing this farm, working on this farm, and now my brother-in-law Trevor has come home. And so she's got some concerns, and she's got some challenges to think about, because she's thinking, well, why is that fair? Where's this sweat equity? How do we capture what we've already put into this? So that word sweat equity is an interesting one, because it's something that has no easily calculable value. And so, it is a challenging concept. And then her 2 children, again, her and Colton are very keen to think about their kids' opportunity to farm. And then we have Lizzie, who was Trevor's first wife. She's outside of the circle because she has nothing to do with the family. They're divorced. Their son, Colton, again, he chose to go and live with mum, has nothing to do with the farm, is somewhat outside of the circle. We have Lacey, who's Trevor's common law partner. She sits on the line because she really doesn't have anything to do with the family. her and Kathy do not get along, and so there's this sense of being kind of, as you say, outside of the circle. And then their child Alice, which does fit in this. So Alice does fit in the circle because she's the grandchild, and so Jim and Kathy accept her as being a member of the family. So this is your snapshot in time now. And what we do with intergenerational transition is we're trying to think about where is everyone going to move in the future. So remember I said that Jim and Kathy own the farm as an incorporated entity. It's a single company that has all of their assets. And in truth, they didn't do anything regarding off-farm investing. Most of their wealth is tied up in the farm. The farm is effectively their source of income for the future. I don't like, not everyone loves the word retirement, so let's just talk about the next stage of their lives. Jim is having the time of his life, and he's not inclined at the moment to move his position. But unfortunately, there's this thing called biology. And biology says that you are going to get older. And as a result, at some point, Jim will not be able to stay or remain in the business circle. I don't have any opinion about when that will be, but at some point. I want to be clear to everyone. There are two transitions that take place in an intergenerational transition. The first transition is transition of management. And the transition of management is perhaps one of the most challenging things, especially for Jim, because Jim's having the time of his life. He likes the control. He's very confident in his ability to farm. But so is Colton, and Colton is very, very interested in new technology, new methods, but him and his dad are butting heads a little bit. They have slightly different risk profiles. So this transition of management is a challenge. More importantly, Jim has now got other children who might not agree to a hierarchy. In other words, they might consider an egalitarian system of management is their preference. Trevor has no desire to defer to his older brother. And Trevor sees his opportunity as should be equal. When actually Trevor's work ethic and Trevor's management abilities are nowhere near the same as Colton's. But, you know, try to have that conversation. So there's this intergenerational transition of management is really quite challenging, even when it's just one child. But when there's more than one child and we have siblings coming into a business together, the roles and responsibilities piece of the puzzle is extremely difficult and challenging. But also for dad to let go of that control. So oftentimes I'm trying to encourage dad to think about moving from the role of CEO to the role of chairman of the board. Now, the thing with intergenerational transition of farms is that we have this massive increase in values. So we're transitioning wealth, and we're transitioning significant wealth. And we can talk about ignoring it. We can say it's not really cash. It's not really that valuable because it doesn't generate that much cash. But the truth is that you need to accept in agriculture that the game has changed. And the game has changed because of this huge increase in farmland values. So the second transition is the transition of ownership. And the transition of ownership happens in two stages, or it can happen in two stages. And the first stage is during the lifetime of mum and dad. And effectively, the transition of ownership during the lifetime of mum and dad is choice, but understanding that this guy here, he's been there for a long time and has no ownership, and he's now realizing that because his brother's come back, what was he building? What was he working for? So there's a motivation for this guy, Colton, to say, I now need to start building equity in this farm. I need to see an actual legal level of ownership. Trevor might feel the same way. So there's an interesting dilemma. And then siblings in the same ownership structure, in this case, it's a company, that can be problematic. So there's some challenges around the transfer of ownership during the lifetime of Jim and Kathy. There's also, because of this, realistically, Jim and Kathy need to move up into this space here, which is between the family and the ownership. In other words, they need to accept that they might have to act as the bank. And the reason why they're acting as the bank is because it's almost impossible for the next generation to go and borrow the money to buy the farm. So there's this move. Kathy's ready to move there tomorrow, and she just wants to understand where and how she's going to receive income in the future when she's doing something different. So that's one of her major concerns. The second piece of the transition of ownership is as a result of the estate. So right now, Jim and Kathy's estate plan isn't good because their wills are outdated and in fact don't even include Josh because they're that old, and their wills were predated their incorporation, so they don't actually address the transition of shares. So Jim and Kathy's wills actually at the moment divide their assets 3 ways, and that includes Jenna. So if Jim and Kathy get hit by the proverbial bus, Jenna becomes a third owner of the farm. And so that means she moves there. And they don't have legal agreements in place, and they don't have they haven't had the communication, the formal communication to understand what that might mean. So if Jenna inherited the shares tomorrow, she might say, you need to pay me out. So there's some dilemmas around this. So you understand, I hope, that if you make a decision in isolation of all of these people, they might react differently depending on the outcome. So families, the perception of fair is different. And so if I asked Jenna, what might be the fair answer to your parents' estate plan, she might have a different answer to Colton, who might have a completely different answer to Trevor. And Josh, again, who's sitting there, he's not sure whether he wants to commit or not because he can somewhat see the challenge unfolding, and he's not sure if he wants to join that because he knows his brothers don't exactly get along very well, and yet he can see a lifetime of, I wouldn't say conflict, but certainly tension, and he's not sure if he wants to join that. So the trick, if there is a trick, is to include all of the family members in a discovery phase that allows them to understand what we're doing and what we're trying to achieve. That isn't changing the fact that Jim and Kathy are the keeper of the keys. We're not creating a democracy, and we're not allowing people to make demands. We're just saying you need to have a voice. What we're saying is your perception of fair is different to your siblings, but if we give you a voice, then we're giving you fair process. And fair process doesn't mean you're going to get what you want, but it does mean that you'll have a better chance of having a voice at the table and a better understanding and perhaps acceptance of why the outcomes might be not the way you anticipated. So that Jenna might get a better understanding of why she can't have that quarter section down by the river. And Trevor might get a better understanding of why he might not be a 50-50 shareholder in the company. So these are things that need to be discussed openly and honestly, because we're trying to do two things usually. We have a desire to have a successful transition of the farm business to the next generation so that it is viable and sustainable, whilst trying also to maintain family harmony. Now, you might not have that as a goal, and that's why it's important to understand what are you trying to achieve. But remembering a transition of the farm in a viable and sustainable way and family harmony might be what we call paradoxical in what we're trying to achieve. So we try to pick a path through this. So I hope that helps you understand, and this model is very useful for all of you to be able to put that your own families into the three-circle model and then think about what it is you're trying to do and where people are trying to move. So what are our farm differentiators? Tradition and history. Tradition is huge and has a huge impact on our decision making. You know, if the farm is reaching its century or past its century, there's a burden of responsibility to maintain it. Nobody wants to be that that generation that dropped the ball. So it does have an impact. And in the family circle, the storytelling is very important, because it is much better to create a moral agreement rather than having to reach for legal agreements. So if the family understands the story, it's much more likely to agree to understand what's going on. One of the myths, and I'm going to say this because I can't see everybody, so you might all be angry at what I say next, but one of the myths out there is that the non-farming children are the ones who act as entitled. And the truth is that invariably it is the farming children who act in an entitled way. And often I find the non-farming children do defer to, yeah, I understand that I can't get a third or half of this because I understand the importance of this transitioning to the next generation. And I understand how I might throw that a curveball into that. And this comes back to this tradition and history. The next thing is informal communication. So we have siblings and mums and dads, and they've grown up communicating in a certain way, and that isn't necessarily the right way for business owners to communicate or for people who are working in the business to communicate. And so we see, you know, shouting, swearing, throwing punches in a family circle, which really isn't appropriate in the ownership circle. And that informal communication can be quite challenging. And we also see a lot of mind reading as an expectation, and that doesn't really work very well. And so again, because in agriculture we tend to be a little isolated, our communication skills aren't always the best. And 99% of getting intergenerational transition to work is all about communication. Lack of formal governance. So everyone hates the word governance, and really all governance is decision making. What is your decision making system? What decision making system do you have in the family circle, in the ownership circle, or in the business circle. And remembering that for the most part, mum and dad have been the decision-making system in all three, but now we're changing the game. We're introducing the next generation, and they're not always going to defer to mum and dad, and also that mum and dad aren't always going to be there. So then what does the decision-making look like for siblings or for cousins? And again, that goes back to that formality. We have divisible businesses. You heard me say earlier, we don't see very many cousin consortiums. What that means is that when siblings reach a certain point, they tend to split the farm. And that happens regularly and often. We have some unique ownership structures and tax rules around farming. And unfortunately, those tend to be the things that people concentrate on in intergenerational transition. Because the farm tax rules allow us to defer tax, and I want you to understand that it's a deferral, there is an awful lot of work done around maintaining that deferral into the next generation. And sometimes it means that the tax tail is wagging the dog, and that is not necessarily the right outcome. And so, you know, I do caution people to be very wary of the tax answer for intergenerational transition if you haven't done all of the other work. Certainly, farm is home is important. If you remember Jenna's really only desire is to be able to take her kids back to the farm and to be able to visit mum and dad. And housing is a very, very big issue in intergenerational transition. And don't underestimate housing as a key trigger point in any kind of challenge that you might see. We have capital rich, cash poor. So yeah, the farm might be worth 10 million, but it doesn't generate a 20% rate of return. And certainly if it did, most of the cash is going back into the farm. Again, the emotional attachment to land can really, really influence decision making to the extent that an awful lot of farm families are quite willing to disinherit their non-farming kids. And, you know, I don't judge you on that. I don't say that's wrong or right, but we're in a somewhat changing environment. We've got different generations with different expectations, and we also have this huge increase in wealth where, you know, farming child gets all the farm and non-farming child gets the life insurance. Used to work in the past, doesn't work anymore because the life insurance policy was taken out 20 years ago and is for like $500,000, and the farm is like 10 million. And so the truth is that somewhere in the middle is sensible. We don't want to divide the farm equally amongst the kids either, because that makes it almost impossible for the farming child to continue. So you've got to find this path in the middle. And the last one I have there is the sibling partnership piece, which we see commonly in farming, but we don't often see cousins. So then we need 6 things to happen. We need the thing to perform, otherwise we're not transitioning it. So performance is important. We need vision. We need everyone to be on the same page and or do some work to understand why we might not be. We need a strategic plan to get us there, and understanding that strategic means also is intergenerational transition and strategic planning overlap. We need to understand what the decision-making systems are going to be in all 3 circles. We need leadership, and we need leadership development. So that's the ability to understand what's going on and make decisions and implement. So failure to implement is probably one of my biggest challenges. We can do all of the planning, but some people sometimes get stuck and they don't seem to be able to move forward. And the last key area is relationships. And if you're starting from a position of disagreement or conflict, you've got a very steep hill to climb. And so to be honest with you, the ones where there's really good, strong relationships also need to understand that in intergenerational transition, there is going to be tension, and how you deal with that tension is important. So at the end of this, what you need to think of is, in the end, do your discernment in the quiet of your heart, in discussion with your family, and in your own investigation of what you want. And I suggest you use advisors to help facilitate this, because most families can't do this on their own. So do we have any questions?
Yeah, we can get into a Q&A period. So thanks a lot for that, Bob. Great presentation. We got a few here. If anybody from the audience has any other questions, feel free to type them into that questions tab at the bottom now. Get into the first one here. So first one is, how do I start this process?
Yeah, I think obviously you can reach out to your trusted advisors and begin the process. One of the things I would suggest is be very careful. Every profession has its own lens. So the lens of the accountant is tax, and the lens of the lawyer is the estate plan, and the lens of the wealth manager or the insurance guy is wealth management or insurance. So you kind of need to create a team. But if I was suggesting where you start, I would say let's start with discovery. And discovery is certainly around including the views of family members. So someone like me, for instance, I would meet with the family, go through a chemistry session just to make sure, I call it chemistry, to make sure that there isn't sort of a personality clash, that people feel comfortable with using me, that there's the kind of the trust, and then I talk to individual family members, and I create it's essentially a feedback to the family to say, these are your key issues that you need to understand as you go through this process before you start making decisions. So discovery gives you the information to then allow yourself to start making and planning. And then the third phase is implementation.
I'm just rolling off that one, what you said about family members. This one just came in. How do the conversations go with deciding who is in the family circle?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It tends to, remembering that I'm suggesting that mum and dad remain the keeper of the keys here, but obviously you can understand how challenging it might be if somebody says you're not in the family circle. So the family, those that are in the family circle, probably do need to agree on a kind of policy, because obviously let's just say a child whose spouse is included in the family circle and a child whose spouse is not included in the family circle, that's obviously going to create some tension. So it certainly in the beginning, I would go through that and say, okay, what do you want to do? And I would certainly say, well, if we've got spouses that aren't going to be included, or even estranged kids, like we do see that happen quite a lot, we'll certainly have a discussion around that to try and ensure that we aren't creating a problem. And so one of our biggest mantras is do no harm. So we don't want to start a fight, we certainly it is a sensitive discussion to have.
Awesome. On the next one here, when would be the best time to begin this process?
So I get that all the time, and everyone I know it says it's never too soon. Well, it probably is. There are times when it's too soon. When your kids are so young that they're not really going to understand things. When you aren't ready to make decisions. What you can do at the very early stages is what, like I said before, the storytelling, the managing expectations, the kind of setting in place the family rules around what is it going to take to allow me to come back, so that kids growing up don't think of it as an open door policy. They know that there's certain things that they need to do or put in place before they get the right to come back. But just to answer that question, probably between the age of 50 and 60 is that ideal time. Chances are your next generation is then moving into their mid to late 20s, early 30s, and that's the time to start beginning the process. But there's no magic, because sometimes you have, like in the family I showed you, you have Jenna's 38 and the youngest child is only 20. So like there's not a perfect time. You just have to pick the time. If you, again, in that family, Jim would be at that ideal sweet spot. Now's the time to start really considering this, because Colton is knocking at the door and getting frustrated.
One of those times, probably bringing in the someone like yourself to talk about that would help too.
Yeah, just open the conversation up.
What about cost? What should I expect something like this to cost?
I love this question.
Of course.
So you've got this weird scenario out in the business world of there's someone who'll tell you, well, we'll do it for free. And it's like, well, no, everyone who's in business knows that free really doesn't get you what you need. And often what's the motivation for free? It's selling you something, or something else is going on. I hope you're all sitting down, because I had this conversation with a colleague the other day. I said, you understand, because of this complexity, we're really one of the first generations that's transitioning incorporated assets. We're also seeing and realizing that there's significant wealth involved, and we've got considerable buildup of tax liabilities within this. So it's complex. So I need you to be prepared to think in increments of $10,000 a time. So you're looking at, depending on the phases, the discovery phase, the planning phase, the implementation, you need to be thinking in the realms of $20,000, $30,000 of work to get you to the right place. I'll accept you can do it cheaper, but again, it's that, what are we hoping to achieve, and what are we trying to do? And I would suggest that you do not want to do this as cheaply as possible. You want to optimize this, because this is a sort of one-off, once in a lifetime opportunity.
Gotcha. A couple more coming in here. So this one might be a couple of these might be ones to reach out to Bob directly after, and we'll give his contact information. But this one's, how do you start again after it was started, then ended, with one member making all the decisions without input from the other family members that are on the farm? Now all parties are confused.
Yeah. I mean, because again, that's not an unusual scenario. Remember, I talked about tradition, and I try and tell people what you did, what worked in the past doesn't work now. The game has changed. It's changed significantly, and so I think for the most part, if everyone it realizes that what went before didn't work, then there's at least this acceptance. let's come back to the table and review it. And there should be hopefully enough relationship capital left to allow the family to come back and sit down with someone like myself and go through some of this and go, yes. But I will warn you, like when I've used the term keeper of the keys, if the keeper of the keys is determined to control the whole process, I don't have a magic wand that gets them to change their mind. I can just inform them and they can make a decision based on what I've told them. But if they choose, it's a little like if anyone in the family is determined to be unreasonable, I don't have a magic wand to fix it. If family members are in conflict and they are determined to remain in conflict, I don't have a magic wand to fix it. It's really, my role is to try and facilitate and mediate and allow you the opportunity, but my role is not to fix your problem. It's your problem, and you as a family have to fix it. Now, the one thing I will say is when I work with families, it's the family that is the client, not mum, not dad, not the guy who's cutting me the check. It's the family, and that is a rule that I have, and it's a sort of a rock that doesn't move.
Gotcha. Another good one on this too. So if Jim, the father, didn't want to become the bank, so to say, what are Colton's, the son with skills, options?
Yeah, so you would hope that if dad didn't want to become the bank, that there had been a discussion sooner than where we're up to now, so that Colton could have, oftentimes we see the next generation start their own smaller business. They go and rent land, they build up, and they have they start building their own equity up on the side, so that so it's not entirely mum and dad are the only the keeper of the keys entirely, and that there's only this one asset. I think, though, oftentimes there's a fear that is unnecessary. So this idea of acting as the bank sometimes is a fear that outgoing generation has, that, well, how are we going to get paid, or how does this work? And oftentimes that's down to just not understanding some of the options. So I think in that case, I might try and educate, just to say, well, what are you fearful of, and why might you not want to act as the bank if you actually do want a successful intergenerational transition? So two things there. One is, if you're not going to act as the bank, let's have that conversation earlier and set up structures and processes earlier, and then also understanding why you might be fearful of acting as the bank.
Gotcha. And I guess with that's kind of our last question right now. So as I mentioned, I'm sure there's a lot more that would come through about the certain scenarios that everyone faces. So I think please feel free to reach out to Bob at bob.tosh@mnp.ca. And before we end today, here's your chance to collect the CCA CEU in professional development. To collect the credit for this webinar, please open your CCA app on your smartphone, click scan course code, and hold your phone up to the monitor so the camera can hover over the QR code. If you're able to do this, your CEU will be submitted immediately. If this does not work for you, please email your first name and last name and CCA number to topcrop@amxbusinessmedia.com. We'll submit your credit for you. Follow-up email will be sent out within 24 hours, which will hold the recording of the webinar and our email address for any feedback. Thanks again for tuning in for today's webinar. Don't forget to visit topcropmanager.com/webinars to view all of our recorded webinars and to register for any upcoming. Thanks again, Bob. I really appreciate it. That was a great presentation.
Thanks a lot, guys.